It was a gray Sunday afternoon when Ethan Miller's quiet life turned upside down. The city outside his window was drenched in rain, the kind that painted the streets silver and made the world feel heavier. He had planned to spend the day alone, reading and catching up on work. But the sudden knock at his apartment door broke that peace, and when he opened it, his two aunts, Grace and Lillian, stood there with tense faces and wet coats. Ethan blinked, surprised. It wasn't often that they came together, and never without calling first. Grace, the older of the two, had a soft kindness about her that always comforted him. She was gentle, patient, and had been like a second mother when he was younger. Her smile could calm anyone, but today it was nowhere to be found. Beside her stood Lillian, her younger sister, confident and outspoken, always dressed with elegance that seemed effortless. But now even Lillian looked uneasy. "Ethan," Grace began quietly, her voice trembling as she stepped inside. "We need to talk. It's important." He took their coats, confused by the serious tone. "Is everything okay? You both look worried." Neither of them answered right away. Lillian walked toward the window, staring at the rain, while Grace sat down on the couch, clutching her hands together. The air felt heavy, as if the rain outside had found its way into the room. Finally, Grace looked up at him. "It's about your Uncle Henry," she said softly. Ethan froze. Henry was Grace's husband, a man he deeply admired. Henry had always been a rock in the family, kind, steady, the one who showed up for everyone. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. Was he sick? Had something happened? What about him? Ethan asked. Grace hesitated, glancing at her sister. Lillian sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Grace, maybe you should just tell him." Grace nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Ethan, I think Henry is hiding something from me. I think he's been unfaithful." The words hit Ethan like a sudden storm. For a moment, he couldn't speak. The thought of his Uncle Honest, loyal Henry being unfaithful seemed impossible. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Grace shook her head. "I don't know for sure. But he's been acting strange. He comes home late, he hides his phone, and he doesn't talk to me like he used to. When I ask, he says work has been stressful. But Ethan, I can feel it. Something's wrong." Lillian turned from the window, her arms crossed. "I've told her for months something was off. Men don't just change for no reason." Her tone carried frustration, not just toward Henry, but toward the situation itself. Ethan sat down, trying to process everything. "Why are you telling me this?" he finally asked. Grace's voice broke as she said, "Because I don't know what else to do. I can't confront him without proof. And I can't live with this doubt anymore. You're the only one I trust. Ethan, you're smart.com. And Henry won't suspect anything from you." Ethan blinked, realizing what she was asking. "You want me to find out if he's cheating?" Grace nodded slowly. "Yes, just observe him. Talk to him. See if you notice anything." Ethan leaned back, torn. The idea of spying on his uncle felt wrong. Henry had been a father figure to him when his own parents divorced. He had taught him how to ride a bike, how to tie a tie, how to face the world with integrity. But the pain in Grace's eyes made it impossible to refuse. "I'll see what I can do." Ethan said at last. Grace reached out, squeezing his hand with gratitude. "Thank you, Ethan. I just need the truth, whatever it is." Lillian finally turned from the window and sat beside her sister. "Grace isn't the only one who deserves the truth," she said, her eyes flicking toward Ethan. "Henry's lies, if there are any, affect all of us. We need to know who he really is." There was something strange in Lillian's tone, something deeper than anger. Ethan couldn't quite place it, but it made him uneasy as they spoke. He studied them, the sisters who had always been so close, now united by pain. Grace's face carried years of quiet love and worry. Lillian's expression was sharper, full of suppressed emotion. Despite their differences, both women seemed broken in their own way. Grace wiped her eyes and tried to smile. "Do you remember when you were little, Ethan, and you used to stay with us every summer? Henry adored you. He used to say you were like the son we never had." Ethan nodded quietly. I remember. That's why I trust you, she said softly. You'll see the truth. You always do. Lillian stood up, impatient. We should go. It's getting late. Ethan walked them to the door. The rain had slowed to a drizzle and the streetlights glowed through the mist. Grace turned before stepping out, her eyes full of silent pleading. Please, Ethan, whatever you find, tell me. I need to know. He nodded, but inside he felt the weight of what he had agreed to. When the door closed, the silence that followed was suffocating. He sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where they had just been. He thought of Henry's laugh, its calm wisdom, the way he'd always looked at Grace with what seemed like love. Could all that have been a lie? Ethan didn't want to believe it, but he also couldn't ignore the look on Grace's face, half heartbreak, half hope. Later that night, as he sat by the window watching the city lights shimmer through the rain, Ethan realized his life had just changed. What began as a quiet Sunday had turned into a mission he never asked for. He was about to step into a web of secrets, that emotions that could tear his family apart. He didn't know it yet. This was only the beginning, the moment everything in his world would start to unravel. Somewhere in that storm, between loyalty and truth, Ethan would have to choose which mattered more, protecting the people he loved, or revealing the secrets that could destroy them. The night deepened and the rain fell harder again. Ethan sat there for hours, his mind circling around the same thought. What if Grace was right? He didn't have an answer that Ethan couldn't sleep that night. Grace's tearful face kept replaying in his mind, her trembling voice echoing in his thoughts. The idea that his Uncle Henry, the man he respected all his life, might be hiding something dark was unbearable. Yet deep down, he knew Grace wasn't the kind of woman to imagine things. Her pain was real, and it demanded answers. The next morning, Ethan decided to start quietly. He didn't want to accuse anyone or stir drama before knowing the truth. So he did what he always did. He acted normal. He called Henry, pretending it was just a casual check-in. Hey, Uncle Henry, lunch this week? He asked cheerfully. Henry agreed immediately, his voice steady and friendly as always. Sure, Ethan, Wednesday. Same place as usual. Perfect, Ethan replied, though his heart was uneasy by Wednesday. He had convinced himself to stay calm and simply observe. When Henry arrived at the small downtown cafe, he looked like the same man Ethan had always known, neatly dressed, charming, and relaxed. He smiled, joked with the waitress, and talked about his latest work project. For a while, Ethan felt guilty for even suspecting him, but small details started to bother him. Henry's new phone was always face down on the table. Every few minutes, the screen lit up and he'd casually turn it off without checking. When Ethan asked about work, Henry gave short answers, quickly changing the topic. He looked restless, as if he was hiding something behind his smile. At one point, Ethan caught a faint scent of perfume on Henry's jacket knot, the soft floral kind Grace always wore. But something stronger, expensive, unfamiliar. Henry noticed his curious look and gave a quick laugh. Oh, that! One of the clients hugged me today. You know how those events go. He said it too quickly. Ethan forced a smile, but said nothing. His instincts told him Grace had been right. That evening, he drove to Grace's house. She opened the door, her eyes tired but hopeful. Did you see him? She asked, trying to sound calm. Ethan nodded. Yes, he seemed fine, but there were small things. Things that didn't feel right. Grace sat down slowly, bracing herself. Like what? Ethan hesitated, not wanting to hurt her. He had a new phone he kept hiding, and there was perfume on his jacket. He said it was a client, but it didn't sound convincing. Grace's face fell, but she didn't cry. Instead, she took a deep breath and whispered, I knew it. He's not the same man anymore. Lillian, who had been quietly listening from the kitchen doorway, walked in and crossed her arms. So it's true, she said bitterly. He's cheating on her. Ethan turned to her. We don't know that yet. We just have suspicions. Lillian shook her head. Men like Henry don't change without a reason. I've seen it before. Her tone was sharp, full of anger that felt personal. Ethan noticed how tightly she held her coffee mug, as if her own heart was hiding something too. Grace looked up at her sister. "Lillian, please, don't make this worse. I just need to understand why." Lillian softened for a moment. "I'm sorry, Grace. I just hate seeing you like this. You've given him everything." Ethan watched them, two sisters bound by love and now by pain. He wished he could fix it, to bring back the warmth that once filled this house. But truth doesn't heal quickly. It first burns through everything that hides it. T. But something inside him whispered that by the time he did, nothing would ever be the same again. Over the next few days, Ethan tried to stay close to Henry without arousing suspicion. He invited him to a weekend barbecue, helped him with errands, even stopped by his office one afternoon. Each time, Henry seemed distracted. Sometimes even defensive when Ethan asked simple questions. Once, when Ethan mentioned Grace's name, Henry's smile faded slightly. "She's fine," he said curtly, then added, "Marriage just gets complicated after so many years." That sentence stayed with Ethan. Complicated sounded like a quiet confession. A few days later, Grace called him again. "Ethan," she said softly, "he started staying out late. Says it's work. But I checked, his office closes at 6. Ethan's stomach twisted. He knew what that meant, but didn't have the courage to say it. "I'll find out," he promised. That night, he drove past Henry's office building around 8. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for one car, Henry's. He waited. 10 minutes later, the office lights turned off, and Henry came out, looking around nervously. He wasn't alone. A woman stepped out behind him, laughing quietly. She was younger, dressed in a long red coat. They spoke for a moment. Then Henry gently touched her arm before they walked off together toward the back street. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't follow them. He couldn't. The truth was already loud enough. He sat in his car, staring at the rain on his windshield, unable to move. Everything Grace had feared was real. Henry was seeing someone else. And Ethan was now the one who had to break her heart with that truth. Later that night, he returned home, exhausted. His phone buzzed. It was Lillian. "Did you find anything?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, almost a calm. Ethan hesitated. "Yes, he was with someone. I saw them together." Was silence on the other end. Then Lillian whispered, "I knew it." Something in her tone caught his attention, not just anger, but sorrow. Deep, personal sorrow. "Lillian, are you okay?" he asked carefully. She paused, then said, "Grace doesn't deserve this. None of us do." And before he could reply, she hung up. The next morning, Grace called again, her voice trembling. "Ethan, did you find out anything? Please tell me the truth." Ethan didn't know how to speak. Every word felt heavy. He didn't want to destroy her hope, but lying would be cruel. "Grace," he said softly, "I saw him. He was with another woman." There was silence. Then a sound, a quiet sob, broken and fragile. "I see," she whispered. "Thank you for telling me." He stayed on the phone, listening to her cry quietly. He wanted to say something to make it better. But there was nothing that could fix this. Later that evening, Lillian came to see him in person. Her expression was cold, but her eyes were full of pain. "You did the right thing," she said softly. Grace needed to know. Ethan nodded, still troubled. "She's heartbroken." "I know," Lillian said, looking away. "But it's better than living in lies." Something in the way she said it felt strange, like she was speaking from experience. Not just anger. As Lillian left, Ethan stood by the window, watching her walk into the dark street. He realized the truth wasn't done revealing itself. Grace's pain was only the beginning. There was something else, something Lillian wasn't saying. And in that quiet, uneasy moment, Ethan understood that sometimes discovering the truth doesn't bring peace. It only opens doors to deeper secrets waiting in the shadows. He had uncovered Henry's betrayal, but he could sense that the story didn't end there. Someone else was carrying a secret, one that would change everything he thought. He knew about his family, The truth had begun to surface, but the storm was far from over. The week after Ethan told Grace, the truth felt painfully quiet. She had withdrawn into herself, barely answering calls, and when she did, her voice sounded hollow. Ethan wanted to check on her, but she needed space. What he didn't expect was a late-night call, not from Grace, but from Lillian. "Ethan." Her voice trembled over the phone. "Can we meet? Please, it's important." There was something in her tone that made him agree without question. Within half an hour, they met at a small cafe near the outskirts of town. It was nearly empty, the lights dim. Rain drizzling outside again, as if the sky couldn't stop mourning, when Lillian walked in. Ethan was startled by how different she looked. Gone was the confident, polished woman who always seemed in control. Her eyes were red. Her hands shook slightly as she wrapped them around a cup of coffee. "I shouldn't have called you," she said quietly, "but I can't carry this anymore." Ethan leaned forward. "What's going on, Lillian? Is it about Grace?" She looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "Yes, but it's also about me." He waited, confused but patient. Lillian took a shaky breath. "There's something you don't know about Henry. Something I should have told you long before you got involved." Ethan felt his heart quicken. "What do you mean?" Lillian looked up and tears filled her eyes. "Henry and we made a mistake. A terrible one. Months ago, before Grace started suspecting anything, he came to me. He said he felt lonely, lost in his marriage. He needed someone to talk to. I thought I was helping him, but it turned into something else." Ethan froze. "You mean?" "You and Henry." She nodded slowly, guilt heavy in her voice. "It wasn't a full affair, Ethan. It was one night of weakness, one I regret every day. He came to me drunk, upset, saying Grace didn't love him anymore. I should have turned him away. I didn't." Ethan felt his chest tighten. He didn't know what to say. Lillian, his aunt, Grace's own sister, was part of the betrayal Grace had been crying over. The truth was so much worse than he'd imagined. Lillian continued, her voice trembling. "After that night, I told him never to come near me again. He agreed, said it was a mistake, and that he loved Grace. But a few months later, found out about the woman you saw him with. That's when I knew Henry hadn't stopped lying. He had just found someone else." Ethan pressed his hands together, struggling to process it all. "Lillian, does Grace know any of this?" "No," Lillian said quickly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "And she can't. She's already broken. If she finds out that I was part of it, Tevin, for a moment it will destroy her." Ethan stared at her, torn between anger and sympathy. "So what do you want me to do?" "I need you to help me tell her the truth," she whispered. "Not about me, about Henry. She deserves to know everything he's done. But leave me out of it. Please, Ethan. I've already punished myself every day for what I did." Ethan leaned back, his mind spinning. He wanted to believe her, but part of him felt betrayed. Lillian had watched Grace cry for weeks, knowing she was part of the story. She had asked Ethan to uncover the truth while hiding her own. He sighed. "You're asking me to lie to protect you." Lillian shook her head. "No, I'm asking you to protect Grace from even more pain. What good would it do for her to lose her husband and her sister on the same day? Let her heal without knowing how deep the betrayal goes." Ethan didn't answer right away. The cafe was silent except for the faint sound of rain hitting the windows. He looked at Lillian, and for the first time, he saw the weight she carried, the shame, the regret, the exhaustion of keeping secrets too long. After a moment, he said quietly, "You're right about one thing. Grace doesn't deserve more pain. But secrets have a way of finding their way out, Lillian. You can't hide from the truth forever." She nodded, her voice breaking. "I know, but please, not yet." When Ethan left the cafe, his heart felt heavier than ever. He had entered this mess to help Grace find answers, but now he was part of a deeper lie. The night air was cold, the streets nearly empty. He stood under a streetlight, staring into the rain, wondering how something as pure as love could turn into so much pain. Over the next few days, Ethan avoided both aunts, unsure what to do. He knew Grace needed to know more about Henry's secret relationship, but how could he face her knowing part of the truth was about her own sister? Finally, Grace called him. Her voice was quiet, calm in a way that made him nervous. "Ethan, can we talk?" They met at her house that evening. She had tried to make tea, but her hands trembled too much to pour it properly. "I just want to understand why," she said softly. "Why would Henry do this to me? What did I do wrong?" Ethan wanted to tell her she had done nothing wrong. That sometimes people break not because they stop loving, but because they don't know how to face themselves. But words felt too small. He told her what Lillian had asked him to everything about Henry's second affair. How long it had been going on, how he had been lying for months. Grace listened without interrupting, her eyes full of quiet sorrow. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ethan. You did what I couldn't do. You found the truth." But then she looked up and said something that pierced him. "There's still something missing. I can feel it. Something you're not saying." Ethan froze. He wanted to tell her everything, but he remembered Lillian's tearful face, her desperate plea. He forced a small smile. "No, Grace, that's all I know." She looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to believe him. Then she simply nodded. "All right." That night, Ethan left her house feeling sick with guilt. He had protected one truth, but buried another. In trying to spare Grace pain, he had become part of the lie. Later that night, his phone buzzed again. It was Lillian. "Did you tell her?" "Yes," he said flatly. "And she doesn't know about me." "No," he replied. "But she suspects something. She's not as blind as you think." There was silence. Then Lillian said softly, "Thank you, Ethan. You did the right thing." Ethan hung up, staring at the dark ceiling above his bed. For the first time, he didn't feel like the honest, dependable man his family always saw him as. He felt like someone caught between two broken hearts, one seeking truth, the other drowning in guilt. As he closed his eyes, he realized this wasn't over. Grace would heal, but the truth always finds a way to rise. And when it did, it wouldn't just break. Henriette would shatter everything the sisters had left between them. The storm wasn't ending. It was only gathering strength. The truth had been spoken, but peace never followed. After Ethan's confession, Grace's world became painfully quiet. Her house, once full of soft music and laughter, now felt hollow. She moved through her days like a shadow, speaking little, thinking much. Henry still didn't know that she had learned about his betrayal. She hadn't confronted him yet. She was waiting maybe for courage, maybe for the right moment, but Ethan knew the confrontation was inevitable. He checked on her every few days. Sometimes she would smile faintly and tell him she was fine, but her eyes always gave her away. She wasn't fine at all. Grace had spent her life believing love could fix anything. But now, she saw that even love could crack beyond repair. Lillian stayed distant for a while. She sent short texts to check on her sister, but avoided seeing her face to face. The guilt had become too heavy. Ethan knew she was barely holding herself together. He wanted to tell her to come clean to free herself from the secret, but every time he looked at Grace, fragile and lost, he couldn't bring himself to destroy her further. One Saturday morning, Grace finally called Ethan and said quietly, "He's home today." "I'm going to ask him." Ethan froze. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" "I need to," she said softly. "If I don't face him now, I'll never find peace." He didn't try to stop her. He just promised to be nearby if she needed him, that afternoon. The storm finally came not from the sky, but from within Grace's home. Henry returned from running errands to find Grace waiting for him in the living room. She was calm, almost too calm, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. "Henry," she began softly, "can we talk?" He smiled faintly, not sensing the gravity of her tone. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Grace looked down, steadying herself. "I know Henry. I know about her." The color drained from his face. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he tried to laugh it off. "Grace, what are you talking about?" "Please don't lie to me," she whispered. "I've seen it. I've heard enough." Just tell me the truth." Henry's shoulders slumped. He rubbed his face and sighed. "It was a mistake, Grace. I never meant to hurt you. A mistake." She repeated, her voice trembling. "Months of lying. Sneaking around? That's not a mistake, Henry. That's a choice." Henry tried to speak, but his words faltered. "I was lonely. We stopped talking, stopped being close. I didn't plan for it to happen." Grace stood up, her calm finally breaking. "You didn't plan to betray me. You just accidentally forgot the woman who stood by you for 20 years. Tears filled her eyes, but her voice remained firm. "I would have forgiven anything: loneliness, distance, even mistakes. But not this. Not you pretending to love me while living a lie." Henry looked down, guilt written across his face. "I ended it, Grace. It's over." She shook her head. "No, Henry, we're over." She turned away before he could answer. It was the last thing she said to him that day. Ethan arrived shortly after Henry left the house. Grace sat in silence on the couch, her eyes red but dry. She had no more tears left. When she saw him, she simply said, "It's done." He sat beside her, not saying a word. The quiet stretched between them, heavy but strangely peaceful. Grace finally exhaled. "Do you know what hurts the most, Ethan? It's not that he cheated. It's that he let me believe everything was fine while he built another world behind my back." Ethan listened, his heart aching for her. "You deserve better," he said softly. She smiled sadly. "I deserve the truth. And now I have it." Days passed. Grace began making changes, small ones at first. She redecorated the house, removed old photos, and packed Henry's things into boxes. She didn't cry as she worked. It was as if the act of letting go gave her strength again. Meanwhile, Lillian couldn't stay away forever. She visited one evening, standing on Grace's porch with trembling hands. Grace opened the door, surprised but calm. "Can I come in?" Lillian asked quietly. Grace nodded and stepped aside. They sat at the table in silence for a long time. Finally, Lillian whispered, "Grace, I'm sorry for everything you've been through." Grace looked at her sister's tearful face and felt something stir inside her, pain mixed with love. "It's not your fault, Lillian. Henry made his choices." Lillian bit her lip. "Still, I should have protected you. I should have said something sooner." Grace frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Lillian froze. Her eyes filled with panic, realizing she had said too much. She tried to cover it up. "I just mean, I saw the signs earlier. I should have warned you." But Grace's eyes lingered on her. She didn't fully believe her sister, but she didn't press. Maybe part of her already knew there was more to the story. But she was too tired to chase it. After a long silence, she said softly, "We can't change the past, Lillian. All we can do is move forward." Lillian nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." Grace looked at her sadly. "Maybe not. But forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who needs peace." The sisters hugged an embrace that carried both sorrow and love. It didn't erase the past, but it began to heal it. Later that night, as Ethan drove home after visiting them, he thought about everything that had happened. In trying to protect Grace, he had uncovered the darkest parts of their family, and yet somehow they were still standing. Henry eventually moved out of town. Grace found a quiet job at a small bookstore, where she spent her days surrounded by stories instead of memories. Lillian started therapy, trying to face her guilt and rebuild her bond with her sister. Ethan often visited both women. With time, he saw the light return to their lives. Grace started laughing again, softly at first, then freely. Lillian began to help her with small things, like gardening and cooking. The pain didn't vanish, but it became something they could carry without breaking. One evening, months later, Grace invited Ethan and Lillian to dinner. It felt almost normal again. The three of them sat together, eating, sharing quiet smiles. When Grace raised her glass, she said something that stayed with Ethan forever. "To truth," she said softly, "it hurts. It ruins things. But it also sets us free." They all raised their glasses. In that simple moment, Ethan understood that healing didn't mean forgetting it, meant choosing peace over pain. That night, as he drove home, he thought back to the first day his aunts had shown up at his door. How confused, scared, and broken they had looked. Now, though their hearts carried scars, there was strength in their silence. Love had failed them in many ways, but honesty had rebuilt what lies destroyed. As the night lights of the city shimmered in his rearview mirror, Ethan finally allowed himself to breathe. The storm that had shaken their family had passed, not without damage, but with lessons that would last forever. Because sometimes the truth doesn't just end a story, it begins a new one. The morning began quietly, wrapped in soft rain and the faint smell of coffee drifting through the house. Claire Matthews loved mornings like this. The world outside her Oregon home felt calm for once. It was one of those rare days when she didn't have to rush to meetings, answer emails, or juggle too many tasks at once. Her teenage son, Ethan, was still upstairs, and the house was still enough for her to finally breathe. She went into the bathroom, craving a few minutes of peace. The warm steam filled the air as she turned on the shower, and for a brief moment, she closed her eyes, letting the sound of falling water wash away the weight she'd been carrying. Since losing her husband Daniel almost 10 years ago, peace had been something she had to fight for. Raising Ethan alone had been both her greatest strength and her quietest sorrow. Every decision, every challenge, every lonely night she had faced it all while keeping a brave face. But this morning felt different. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the way the world seemed slower. Or maybe it was the small ache in her chest that had been whispering lately, an ache that told her something. It told her something. She reached for her towel when suddenly there was a soft knock on the bathroom door. "Mom." Ethan's voice came through, low and unsure. Claire blinked, surprised. Ethan was usually the type to keep to himself, especially since he had started high school. He had that quiet teenage independence, kind and respectful, but distant in the way most 17-year-olds are. For him to knock like that early in the morning, it meant something was wrong, or at least unusual. "Yes, honey. What's wrong?" she asked, her voice echoing lightly through the bathroom. There was a pause on the other side of the door. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Something in his tone made her heart skip. It wasn't panic, but there was weight in his voice, something careful. Something that said he wasn't sure how she'd react. She grabbed her robe, quickly tied it, opened the door just a little. Ethan stood there in the hallway, hair messy, face serious, holding something in his hands. For a moment, Claire's mind raced. Had something happened at school? Did he break something? But then she saw it. In his hands was a small photo frame, wooden old, with a faint crack along the glass. Inside was a picture Claire hadn't seen in years. Her and Daniel standing on the front porch, smiling like time had never meant to move forward. Daniel's arm was around her, his eyes bright, full of the warmth that had drawn her to him all those years ago. Her breath caught. Where did you get that?" she asked softly. "I found it in the attic," Ethan said, looking down at the photo like it was something sacred. "I was trying to find my baseball glove. And this was in an old box. There was also something else." He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a yellowed envelope. The edges were frayed, but the writing on the front was clear. "To Claire, if you ever need me again." Her stomach turned. The handwriting was unmistakable Daniel's. Claire froze in the doorway. For years, she had gone through every drawer, every box, trying to find traces of him after the accident. There had been pictures, old notes, but never a letter. Never something like this. Ethan looked worried. "Mom, are you okay?" She blinked, coming back to herself. I don't know. I just didn't expect." Her voice broke slightly, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to steady her breath. Ethan stepped closer. "I didn't read it. I thought it should be yours." His thoughtfulness, his calmness, the maturity in his tone, it struck her deeply. For so long, she'd seen Ethan as her reason to stay strong. But now, in that hallway, she saw the young man he was becoming. The one who carried his father's steadiness in his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, taking the envelope carefully from his hand. As though it might crumble, For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain outside filled the silence between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was heavy, but in a way that felt meaningful. There was something sacred about that quiet, as if Daniel himself was standing just beyond it, waiting for her to open what he had left behind. "Do you want me to give you space?" Ethan asked after a while, his voice gentle. Claire looked at him, her son, the only piece of Daniel she had left in the world, and shook her head. "No, maybe this was meant for both of us." He nodded, and for the first time in a long while, they shared a look that said everything. Words couldn't. Understanding, love. The quiet bond between two people who had survived the same heartbreak in their own ways. Claire stepped out of the bathroom, the robe still tied loosely around her, the envelope clutched tightly in her hand. The hallway felt colder than before, but also somehow alive. She looked down at the envelope again, running her fingers over the faded ink. Daniel had always been the type to leave small notes, sweet, thoughtful, often tucked inside her sketchbook or taped to her coffee mug before he left for work. "You make the world brighter," one had said. Another, "Don't forget to smile, sunshine." But this was different. This was his voice reaching through time, through loss, through the space between their worlds. She walked downstairs, Ethan following silently behind her. They sat together on the couch, the photo resting on the coffee table between them. The sound of rain was steady, rhythmic. It's like a heartbeat in the background. For a few seconds, Claire just stared at Daniel's handwriting, afraid to open it. What if it hurt? What if it brought everything back? But what if it healed something she didn't even know was still broken? "Do you want me to read it with you?" Ethan asked quietly. She smiled faintly. "Yes, I think your dad would want that." And in that small, warm living room, the same one that had seen laughter, grief, and silence, they prepared to read the words of the man who had once been the center of their world. Claire's hands trembled as she tore open the seal. The paper was fragile, but his handwriting was clear and strong, as if even time couldn't fade his love. Her eyes scanned the first few words, and though she didn't read them aloud yet, tears welled up instantly. She placed her other hand over Ethan's. "Your dad always knew how to find the right words," she said softly. Ethan squeezed her hand. "Then maybe this is one of them." As the rain fell harder outside, Claire realized something she hadn't in years. Sometimes healing doesn't come with grand moments or miracles. Sometimes it begins with something as simple as a knock on a door and a voice that says, "Mom, I need to talk to you." And in that moment, she knew life was about to change again. Not through loss this time, but through rediscovery. What waited inside that letter would soon unfold everything they both needed to hear. But for now, all Claire could do was hold her breath and listen to the rain, wondering if this was Daniel's way of reaching back, reminding her that love never truly disappears, just finds new ways to return. The rain still whispered outside, as Claire held the letter in her trembling hands. The house felt different now, quiet, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that came before something important. Ethan sat beside her, his eyes filled with curiosity and concern. The photo of his parents still rested on the table between them, a silent reminder of the love that once filled this home. Claire hesitated for a moment. She had spent years trying to move on, pretending that she was fine, convincing herself that grief was something that faded over time. But now, with this letter in her hands, it all came rushing back. Every memory, every laugh. Every night she'd cried quietly so Ethan wouldn't hear it, all pressed down on her. Like the weight of a forgotten past suddenly remembered. "Mom," Ethan said softly, "it's okay. You can read it when you're ready." Claire nodded, wiped her tears, and carefully unfolded the paper. The handwriting was strong and familiar, curved in the same confident strokes she used to see on sticky notes around the house. For a moment, she just stared at the words before beginning to read aloud. "My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back." The words hit her like a wave. She felt her breath catch, and her hands shook slightly. Ethan reached over, quietly placing his hand over hers. She continued reading, her voice soft but steady. "I want you to know that I wasn't afraid when I left. The only thing I feared was leaving you and Ethan behind. I don't want this letter to make you sad. I wanted to remind you of how much you were loved and how proud I am of the life we built together." Tears slid down Claire's cheeks, but she didn't stop reading. She felt Daniel's presence in every line, every word written with love and care. It was as if he was sitting right there beside her, speaking through time, through paper and ink. "Promise me you won't close your heart. I know you'll miss Mile, miss you too. More than you'll ever know, but life is still waiting for you. There will be days when you laugh again, even when you think you can't. Let yourself. It doesn't mean you've forgotten Mint, means you're alive." Claire paused, pressing the letter against her chest. For years she had felt guilty every time she smiled or found a moment of peace. But now, hearing Daniel's words telling her it was okay, it broke something open inside her. Ethan was silent. But his eyes glistened. He knew, didn't he? He knew you'd keep holding on. She nodded slowly. "He always knew me better than I knew myself." She looked back at the letter and continued reading. "Tell Ethan that I love him. Tell him to chase life, not fear it. Tell him that no matter where he goes, I'll be proud of him. And Claire, when he's old enough, tell him about that night we danced in the kitchen with no music. That's the memory I want him to keep of us. That laughter, that love that was our best moment." Claire smiled through her tears. She remembered that night vividly. It was late. The radio had broken. And they had no music. But Daniel had pulled her close and swayed with her anyway, whispering the words of the song they both loved. She had laughed so hard her stomach hurt, and Daniel had kissed her forehead, saying, "We don't need music. You're enough." That memory, buried deep beneath years of grief, now returned like sunlight breaking through clouds. She finished the last few lines. "So if you ever find this, promise me this you'll live again. You'll open the curtains, let the sun in, and remember that love doesn't die. It changes form, that's all. I'll always be with you in the laughter of our son, in the quiet mornings, and in the way you keep moving forward. Always yours, Daniel." When she finished reading, Claire couldn't speak. The words hung in the air, soft and heavy. Ethan looked at her, unsure of what to say. He was used to seeing his mother strong and composed, but this was different. This was raw, real. "Mom," he said quietly, "he wrote that for you. But I think he wrote it for me too." Claire turned to him, her heart aching in the best way. "He did, sweetheart. He wanted us both to live, not just survive." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes glancing at the photo on the table. "I think he'd be happy with us. Even if things aren't perfect, we've made it this far." Claire took a deep breath. For the first time in years, she didn't feel that crushing emptiness inside her chest. Instead, she felt warmth, grief mixed with love, sadness mixed with peace. Daniel's letter had done something she didn't expect, had healed something that words had never been able to reach before. She placed the letter back into the envelope, smoothing it carefully. "We should keep it somewhere safe," she said. "Not to hide it, but to remind us." Ethan smiled faintly, like a promise. "Yes," she said, smiling through her tears. "A promise to live." The rain outside began to fade, replaced by soft sunlight breaking through the clouds. The golden light filled the living room, and for a moment felt almost like a quiet message that Daniel was still watching over them. Claire stood up and walked toward the window. Drops of water still clung to the glass, glimmering like tiny diamonds. She thought about everything Daniel had written. How he had known her so deeply, how he had somehow prepared her for the day she'd have to live without him. And now, 10 years later, it was as if his words had found their way back right when she needed them most. Behind her, Ethan spoke again. "Mom, you know what I think?" She turned to him, smiling softly. "What?" "I think Dad would want us to go somewhere. Like one of those places you two used to visit, maybe? Maybe it's time we start making new memories too." His words hit her gently, but deeply. New memories. The thought scared her, but also filled her with hope. "That sounds perfect," she said quietly. Ethan grinned, relief flickering in his eyes. For the first time in a long while, they both felt something neither of them had dared to feel: peace. Later that day, Claire placed the letter in a wooden box and kept it on the mantel. It wasn't just a memory. It was a reminder that love doesn't end with goodbye. It transforms, just like Daniel said. That night, as the sky darkened, Claire stood by the window again. She could almost feel Daniel's presence, warm, steady, like the faint touch of someone standing just behind her. She whispered, "Thank you," into the quiet air. And somewhere in her heart, she felt an answer, not in words, but in the calm that filled her. From that moment on, she knew this letter wasn't meant to reopen old wounds. It was meant to guide her forward, to remind her that even after loss, life still waits. And though Daniel was gone, his love was still here, alive in every beat of her heart, and in the son they had raised together. That morning, Ethan had knocked on her door. He didn't know it then, but that small, simple act had changed everything. It had opened not just a door, but a path back to life. The weeks after finding Daniel's letter felt like the world had shifted in quiet, invisible ways. The sadness that had lived in Claire's chest for years was still there, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It had changed into something softer, something that reminded her she was still alive. Every morning she opened the curtains a little wider. She made coffee and actually tasted it. She smiled when she passed old photos, not because the pain was gone, but because the love behind them finally felt warm again. Ethan noticed the change first. His mom was laughing again, humming as she cooked, painting at her little corner desk like she used to when he was a kid. For years, her paints had sat untouched, gathering dust. But now the table was alive with color again, blues, golds, and warm tones that looked like light breaking through clouds. One afternoon, Claire stood by the window, a brush in her hand, lost in thought as the Oregon sky glowed with soft gray light. She was painting a small house under the Reina, familiar Sean, but this time. There was a bright window in the center, glowing like hope. She didn't even realize how symbolic it was. That's when a gentle knock came at the front door. She wiped her hands on a cloth and opened it to find Mark Turner, their neighbor. He was a few years older than her, tall with kind eyes and a calm voice. Mark had lived next door for as long as Claire could remember. He had helped with repairs, shoveled snow in winter, and checked in on her and Ethan after Daniel's accident. He was the kind of man who never asked for anything but was always there when needed. "Hey, Claire," he said, holding a small bag. "You mentioned last week your coffee machine was acting up, so I brought some beans from the shop I go to. Maybe fresh coffee can convince it to behave." Claire smiled, warmth touching her face. "You didn't have to do that, Mark." "I wanted to," he said simply, his eyes kind. "Besides, you look like someone who's finally breathing again. That deserves good coffee." She laughed softly, a sound she hadn't realized she'd missed making. "Come in, I'll test them right now." Inside, the air smelled of paint and cinnamon. Mark looked around at the art scattered across the room, some unfinished, some full of life. "You've been painting again," he said. Claire nodded, pouring water into the kettle. "I found something that reminded me of who I used to be. Or maybe who I still am." Mark didn't press. He just smiled, understanding more than words could say. They had both known Losmark's wife had passed away years ago. That silent understanding between them didn't need to be spoken. It just existed quietly. As the coffee brewed, Ethan came downstairs. He paused when he saw Mark and smiled politely. "Hey, Mr. Turner." "Hey, champ," Mark replied. "Your mom's coffee machine is in trouble again, so I brought back up." Ethan chuckled. "That thing's been half broken since I was 12. Claire shook her head with a playful sigh. "You two are never going to let me live that down, are you?" They all laughed, and for a moment it felt natural, like a scene from a life that had once been whole. There was no awkwardness, no forced cheer. Just this simple warmth of human connection. After Mark left, Ethan turned to his mom. "You like him, don't you?" he asked, half teasing, half serious. Claire's face softened. "He's kind. That's all," Ethan grinned. "You deserve kind." His words hit her deeper than he knew. That night, as she cleaned her brushes, she thought about Mark. His patience, his calmness, the quiet way he filled the room without trying to fix anything. She hadn't realized how much she missed that feeling, having someone simply be there. Without needing to fill the silence, days passed and their paths kept crossing. Mark would stop by to return a borrowed book, help fix a loose window latch, or bring groceries when it rained. Claire started to lose care to admit. There was something safe in his company. One afternoon, she invited him to see her studio. "It's a mess," she warned with a laugh. "I doubt that," he said, stepping inside. The small room smelled of paint and turpentine. Canvases leaned against the walls, each one a story waiting to be told. "You're really talented, Claire. These paintings, they have heart." She blushed slightly, shaking her head. "I don't know. I used to paint for Daniel. He always said my work had too much emotion, too much life. I stopped after he passed." Mark studied one painting a storm over a quiet sea, with a faint light on the horizon. "Looks to me like you never really stopped. You just needed the right reason to start again." His words lingered in her mind long after he left. That night, as the house grew quiet, Claire found herself sitting on the couch with Ethan. They watched an old movie together, one Daniel used to love. Halfway through, Ethan leaned against her shoulder and said, "I like seeing you happy again, Mom. Dad would too." She kissed the top of his head. "You think so?" "I know so," he said, smiling softly. Something in his voice reminded her of Daniel's strengths. The same steady tone, the same warmth. For the first time, Claire felt that her life wasn't split between before and after. It was all part of one journey: pain, love, loss, and healing, woven together into something whole. The next morning, Claire walked outside with her coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in pink and gold. Mark was in his yard fixing a fence. He looked up, caught her eye, and smiled. She smiled back, holding her mug a little tighter. "Morning," he called out. "Morning," she replied. He walked over, wiping his hands. "You ever think of selling your paintings?" "Not really," she said, shrugging. "Why?" "Because I think people need to see them. They're full of hope." His words stayed with her all day. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to share her art again, to share her story. Even the painful parts. Because maybe someone else out there needed to be reminded that love could survive loss. Later that week, Claire found herself setting up a small display at the local art fair. Mark helped her carry the canvases while Ethan helped arrange them. As people walked by, admiring her work, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. One woman stopped and asked, "What inspired these?" Claire smiled gently. "Memories. And second chances." When the fair ended, Mark walked her home. The street was quiet, bathed in the soft light of evening. "You did amazing today," he said. "I was terrified," she admitted. "You didn't look it," he replied, smiling. "You looked like someone who finally remembered how to live." Claire looked at him, then really looked, and something shifted inside her. It wasn't a spark of sudden romance. It was deeper, slower, something that came from understanding. From two hearts that had both known loss and learned how to breathe again. That night, as she lay in bed, Claire thought about how far she had come from the knock on the bathroom door to finding Daniel's letter. To this quiet sense of peace. Life hadn't given her back what she lost, but it had given her something just as precious: the courage to begin again. And as she drifted to sleep, she realized Daniel had been right all along. Love doesn't die. It just finds new ways to keep living. Months passed, and life in the small Oregon town slowly settled into a new rhythm. Claire no longer moved through her days with that quiet ache she used to carry. The house that once felt too big, too empty, now felt alive again with laughter, warmth, and something she hadn't dared to believe in for years: peace. Every morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, catching the faint glimmer of paintbrushes soaking in a jar by the sink. Claire would hum softly while making breakfast, the smell of toast and fresh coffee drifting through the air. Ethan usually joined her a few minutes later, still half asleep but smiling, always asking, "What's the plan for today, Mom?" And sometimes, when the weekend came, Mark Turner would stop by. He'd knock lightly on the door, coffee in hand, and ask if she needed help fixing something or if she wanted to take a walk. At first, their meetings had felt cautious to people learning how to exist in the same space without letting old grief cast shadows. But now their connection had deepened into something simple and honest. Mark had become part of their life. He didn't try to fill Daniel's place. He respected the love that came before, but he added something new. Stability, warmth, a steady kindness that slowly changed the air in the house. One evening after dinner, Claire found herself sitting in the living room with Ethan and Mark. The fire crackled softly, painting the walls in orange light. Ethan was showing Mark some photos from a school project, and Mark listened with genuine interest, nodding and smiling in all the right places. Claire sat back quietly, watching the two of them. For the first time, she realized how naturally Mark had fit into their small family. It wasn't forced, it was gentle, like the world had been preparing them all for this moment. Later that night, after Ethan went upstairs, Mark stayed behind to help Claire clear the table. As they worked side by side, their hands brushed when they both reached for the same plate. Neither pulled away immediately. It wasn't awkwardette, was quiet, meaningful. "Thank you," she said softly, breaking the silence. "For what?" "For being here. For not pushing, for just showing up." Mark looked at her with that calm, steady gaze. "You don't need to thank me for that, Claire. Sometimes being there is the only thing that really matters." Something about his words hit her deeply. It reminded her of Daniel's letter, how he had told her to live again, to find happiness without guilt. She realized she wasn't betraying the past by caring about someone new. She was honoring it by allowing herself to move forward. The weeks turned into months. Claire's art began to attract attention. People started buying her paintings from local fairs. She even got an invitation to display her work in a small gallery in Portland. When she told Mark and Ethan, their reactions were pure pride. "You're finally sharing what's been inside you all along," Mark said, smiling. Ethan grinned. "I told you people would love your work, Mom." On the day of the exhibit, Claire stood in front of her collection, each painting a reflection of her journey. One canvas showed a rainy day with a small house in the distance, a glowing window in the middle. Another showed two figures dancing in a kitchen surrounded by soft light. And then there was the final one, a letter resting on a wooden table. Sunlight falling across it, with the faint outline of a hand above it. People stopped and stared. Many asked about the meaning behind it. Claire simply said, "It's about finding messages from the past that still guide you today." As the night ended, Mark found her standing by the last painting, lost in thought. "He'd be proud of you, Claire," he said gently. She smiled, her voice soft. "I hope so. I think he helped me find my way back." When they drove home, Ethan was half asleep in the back seat, and the quiet hum of the car filled the night. Mark glanced over at Claire, her profile lit by passing streetlights. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "how life decides when to give us second chances?" Claire looked out the window, the reflection of the stars catching in her eyes. "All the time," she said. "Sometimes I think it starts with something smaller knock, a moment, a choice. You never realize it's changing your life until later." Mark nodded thoughtfully. Maybe that's what makes it special. When they reached home, Mark helped her carry a few things inside. At the door there was a pause, the kind that feels heavier than silence, yet not uncomfortable. Claire looked at him, her heart calm but full. "Mark," she said quietly, "you've brought something back into my life I thought I'd lost for good." He smiled gently. "You just needed someone to remind you it was still there." That night, after he left, Claire stood alone in the hallway. Her eyes drifted toward the bathroom, the same door where, months ago, everything had begun. That small knock, that hesitant voice of her son had been such an ordinary moment. Yet it changed the course of her life completely. She walked closer, touched the wooden frame, and smiled to herself. If Ethan hadn't knocked that morning, she would never have found Daniel's letter. She might have kept living quietly, painting over her grief without ever healing it. That one small moment had led her to rediscover her strength, her art, and even her capacity to love again. It was strange how life worked that way, how the smallest actions could lead to the biggest transformations. Ethan came down the stairs then, his hair messy, eyes tired but warm. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked with a smile. He shrugged. "Just thinking. About Dad, about you, about everything." Claire sat on the couch and he joined her. "You know," she said softly, "your dad once told me love doesn't disappear, just changes shape." Ethan leaned against her shoulder. "I think he was right." "I think so too," she whispered, resting her hand on his. They sat there for a long while, the house filled with quiet comfort. The rain had stopped outside, replaced by the soft hum of night. Claire felt peaceful, like she had finally reached the other side of something long and painful. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains, golden and warm. Mark stopped by with breakfast, and Ethan greeted him with a grin. It wasn't awkward or uncertain anymore. It was normal, like he belonged there. As they all sat around the table, laughter and soft conversation filled the air. And somewhere deep inside, Claire felt Daniel's presence not as a ghost of sorrow, but as a memory of love that would always guide her. Later, as she stood by the window, watching the sky bloom with color, she thought about everything that had happened. One small knock, a letter from the past. A neighbor's quiet kindness hit had all come together to remind her of one simple truth. Life doesn't wait for us to be ready. It just asks us to open the door when it knocks. That thought made her smile. Because now, when she looked at her life, the laughter, the art, the people she loved, she didn't see what she had lost anymore. She saw what she had found. And though she would always wonder how that one morning had changed everything, she didn't need all the answers. Some moments, she realized, are meant to be mysteries beautiful. Gentle reminders that love, in all its forms, always finds its way home.